Hey guys, welcome back to A Thousand Movies Before You Die. Put the camera up here. There we go. Haha, welcome back. It's Toby, the half of the Tobe and Nate combo, here to discuss really fantastic two movies that I always confused in the past. Both starred Reggie Robinson, Joan Bennett, and Dan Duryea. Fantastic film noir staples, right? One is called The Woman in the Window from 1944, and then 1945's Scarlet Street. So a year apart, similar story. Certainly, certain beats are very similar, and of course, both directed by Fritz Lang. So you can be forgiven for thinking that maybe these are sort of remakes of each other. Maybe it's like a Star is Born situation, but that's odd. Like really, a year apart. It's different studios. The first one is I think International Studios or something like that, and the other one is Fox, 20th Century Fox. So it was always confusing too. So we're going to get into this. So we're going to compare the two. I'm not going to spoil them until I warn you about the spoilers, and then I'll go into a more deeper comparison between the two. But just off the bat here, let's get into these two really cool film noirs for Noirvember. Here we go. All right, guys. So let's compare these two films. Both, as I said, directed by Fritz Lang. I'm going to refer to my notes here. We've got Edward G. Robinson, Joan Bennett, and Dan Duryea in The Woman in the Window. Edward G. Robinson plays Professor Richard Wainley, and Joan Bennett plays Alice Reed, and Dan Duryea plays Tim. So this movie was done first. Fritz Lang didn't like the ending, so then he did. They're also different writers. That's why they're quite different movies. But again, with Fritz Lang being the director and wanting to fix the ending, the endings have a similarity to them. So Scarlet Street, which was made in 1945, also stars Edward G. Robinson. This time, very memorable name, Christopher Cross, Chris Cross. Joan Bennett plays Kitty, right? Her name is Kitty Marsh, also Catherine Marsh. And then Dan Duryea plays Johnny Prince, right? And Dan Duryea is a fantastic villain. I love Dan Duryea as a villain. He just seems to gleefully be evil, right? And I like the juxtaposition in both these films, but much more in Scarlet Street, right? Which I think is the better film between Dan Duryea and Edward G. Robinson's character. With Edward G. Robinson, who's kind of our hero, right? He's much more brooding and sort of pathetically twisted, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, right? Let's compare these two. Page turn, right? So The Woman in the Window is much more innocent, right? Both movies start with a middle-aged man who is, he's sitting with a bunch of friends in both cases, right? And the middle-aged men are chatting, and then he leaves that encounter, and in both situations he meets Joan Bennett's character. Now, in The Woman in the Window, it's much more innocent. She's looking at a painting of her. He's looking at a painting of a beautiful woman, and then she happens to just walk up and be standing there, right, on this dark street at night. And they have a nice friendly conversation, and then he goes back to her place for a drink, and he's been warned, right, by his friends at that dinner that he was at, that these types of situations always end badly, get people into trouble, right? His family life in this situation is also fairly pleasant. He's putting his kids and his wife on a train, and they're going on a trip, and he's going to join them after. So he's alone, right? And his friends are like, "Wow, you really get in trouble like that." Right? And he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it, whatever." So now he meets Joan Bennett's character, right? And she's looking at this painting of herself, and he's admiring it. And this is how they start talking, right? And they end up back at her apartment. Sorry, looking up her name, Alice. It's confusing, right? They have different names and similar characters. It really became, my brain is already not the best. So it really became an issue trying to keep all this straight, right? And so in Scarlet Street, the setup is already very different, right? Also, the characters are more innocent in The Woman in the Window, right? I mean, he's just a mild-mannered professor, right? He's just kind of a regular guy. Joan Bennett's character is a fairly nice girl, right, who's living on her own. And Dan Duryea is a blackmailer, right? And he's he's fairly nasty, right? But he's not as super nasty as he is in Scarlet Street. He's way nastier. But in both cases, he's just pleasant to watch. Not pleasant. He's just fun to watch. Dan Durier's villainy, his evilness is just fun to watch, right? And I mean, in Scarlet, he's much worse in Scarlet Street. Anyway, I'll get into that. So yeah, War in the Window, more innocent, right? Yeah, he's more innocent. The thing that brings them together, like he goes back to her apartment. They just have a drink together. Like it's fairly innocent. And then a man bursts into her apartment and he slaps Joan Bennett around and he's like, super jealous. And then he attacks Edward G. Robinson. This is all like out of nowhere. It was just this nice, pleasant, fire, and they're having a drink. And then yeah, he attacks Edward G. Robinson. Alice, Joan Bennett, hands him a pair of scissors and he stabs the guy to death, right? So that's another similarity, right? Is the stabbing in the two movies. Anyway, I'm getting a spoiler. So anyway, this part is no spoiler, right? He stabs this guy to death. So this gets the ball rolling. So instead of going to the police, right, the plot begins with, now they're going to cover it up. So they're fairly innocent. He murdered this guy to like self-defense. He was choking him to death. And now they're kind of working together to cover it up. And Dan Durier shows up. Like really, it's near the end of the movie that he shows up as the blackmailer, who happened to be a guy that was following. It's a part of the movie is who was the guy they murdered. It turns out he was more famous, and this guy was following him around because some people didn't trust him, whatever. That's Dan Durier. So he knows that this guy's been showing up at see, I almost called her Kitty. Showed up at Alice's place. Am I getting that right? It was Alice, right? At Alice's place. And actually, the fact that her name is Alice Reed is important. Initials, right? She during the cover up, he's got to get the body out of there and all this stuff, and she keeps his pen or pencil, which has his initial on it, Edward G. Robinson, right? So this is sort of what do you call it? Security, just in case he's going to get his car and he's going to come back and he's going to grab the body, but she's like, how do I coming back? Like, you just leave, right? And leave me with the body. So he gives her his coat, but there's a pencil in there, which she ends up keeping. And this helps Dan Durier with the blackmail later, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, right? Now we'll go to Scarlet Street. And I mean, the only thing I can tell you about the ending of A Woman in the Window, or The Woman in the Window, is Fritz Lang didn't like it. And that was one of the main reasons for redoing the movie. That's all I'm going to say about it before the spoilers. So Scarlet Street is much darker, right? The characters are much darker. So Chris Cross, I'll call him Chris from now on, because that's what they call him. They call him Chris. He's not Christopher in the movie. His name's Christopher. They call him Chris. So Chris is not just some innocent middle-aged guy. He's very pathetic, right? His home life is really nasty. His wife is just awful, awful shrew that you just want to push down the stairs. He's so pathetic in the way he just buckles under his annoying wife, just the way he falls in love with Kitty. He's pathetic to the point where he just deserves what he gets, right? He's awful to watch. Great performance by Edward G. Robinson, but just a character, right? Kitty, who in A Woman in the Window is, she's just a woman who's had her picture painted, and this thing happens. The worst thing that she's seeing some guy, I guess, who she doesn't really know who he is, and he bursts in, and all this happens. But she's really not nasty or evil. She's a piece of work in Scarlet Street. Like, Kitty is a real nasty piece of work. Like, from the beginning, she's deceitful. From the beginning, she's just using Chris, right? And it's really unpleasant, right? Dan Durier is far more unpleasant. He's slapping Kitty around, right? She doesn't seem to mind. She's always telling her girlfriend, well, that's what love is, like, you wish you had a guy slapping you around. Like, she's pathetic. She's nasty. She's like, it's always like, both her and Dan Durier are like just super lazy. They don't want to work. Like, they're just presented as this nasty couple, right? And the home life, right, is awful. And the way they meet, like home life, I mean, for Edward G. Robinson's wife's is horrible shrew. And then the meeting, the one is an innocent meeting, the one's looking at a picture and she's standing there, right? It's almost like a romantic comedy. Not at all in Scarlet Street. You know, the meeting, and this is the spoiler, happens very early on. He sees her, you know, being beaten up by Dan Duryea. He goes over and rescues her, and right away she starts sort of playing him, and he's pathetic. Like right away, he falls in love with her, and he's a painter, right? And she turns out is in love with this guy who was beating her up. It turns out like he just wanted some money from her and she didn't have enough, so he beat her up, but she doesn't seem to mind this. And then they have a plan. They make a plan to basically bilk Chris out of whatever money they can. So she gets him to start embezzling money from work. So that's another thing. He's an embezzler, right? He's not. He's nothing like that in the other movie, in The Woman in the Window. So in Scarlet Street, yeah, so he starts embezzling money to pay for this apartment. She's a real jerk about the apartment, right? Dan Duryea is always over. And then it turns out he's a painter. So Dan Duryea like sells his paintings out from under him, but it turns out he's a great painter. Like he gets famous, but he doesn't because he like she says, "Oh, you know, I had to sell your paintings," and she signed them as the artist. So they think she's the artist, and he's so pathetic that he doesn't mind because he's in love with her, and he doesn't realize that she's doing all this stuff behind his back, right? So she basically tells him, "Well, I had to sell your paintings because I needed money. I didn't want to ask you for more money." And he's just kind of happy that he is actually a great painter. He doesn't mind giving her the credit, right? But then, of course, you know, they completely use him and manipulate him, and yeah, like I said, tone much darker. So I'm going to the spoilers now, right? So if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend seeing them both, right? Both they're different enough, especially if you're an Edward G. Robinson fan or a Dan Duryea fan or a Joan Bennett fan, right? There's a or Fritz Lang fan. Like, if you can only watch one, I would watch the darker one, right? Which is Scarlet Street. Um, you're gonna like the ending better. You're gonna be disappointed by the ending. I shouldn't spoil it that way, but doesn't mean you shouldn't watch it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't watch it, right? It's a great film. It really is a great film. So yeah, recommend both. So here we go. Into spoilers. You've been warned. You've been warned. All right, here we go. The ending. Oh my god. So Dan Duryea is the blackmailer. They decide the only way to deal with the blackmailer is to kill him. They're going to poison him. So Edward G. Robinson and Dan Duryea here, I think, are good. Like, not foils, but just I like that one is just happily nasty evil, Dan Duryea. Whereas Edward G. Robinson is this sort of like in the first one, he's this plotting, you know, what to do with the body, you know, what, you know, that now they have to kill Dan Duryea. It's very sort of cold blooded and methodical in how he deals with it. And the first one is much more of a police procedural, right? Where I love these movies where the culprit or they're looking for somebody, the police are or whatever. This is like The Big Clock with Charles Lawton and so William Holden. I can't remember. That's so bad that I can't remember. Oh, it's Ray Milland. And you know, Ray Milland witnesses this murder, and then they're looking for the murderer, but you know, they're looking for the guy who witnessed the murder. He's the one. They don't know it's him because his boss did it, and his boss is involved. And so basically, you have this investigation going on, and you have the person that is guilty is involved in this investigation. So Edward G. Robinson's friends, I think it's Massey is his name. What is his name? Sorry, I gotta go back. Um, Raymond Massey. Raymond Massey plays his friend, the police detective, and Edward G. Robinson, you know, is the murderer, and he just hid the body. And remember, in this one, him and Joan Bennett are working together. They're trying to help each other, and this blackmailer shows up. But his friend is trying to solve the murder, so he's bringing Edward G. Robinson along. So Professor Richard Wainley, he's bringing him along to all these, you know, investigations and whatever. And he keeps saying stupid stuff, Edward G. Robinson. Like he keeps saying stuff that he shouldn't know. He's like, oh, something about the murder happening at night. And I didn't say it happened at night. And then they kind of, there's this pause and they go, but of course, you know, of course it would have to have happened at night. So at first they're not suspicious at all because he does this a couple times, but then they start not ever really getting suspicious, but so that when they, okay, here comes the cop out. So then Dan Duryea goes to a meeting with Joan Bennett for the money exchange, but where they're planning to poison him. Edward G. Robinson isn't there, right? He's waiting in his apartment for this to happen. She messes it up, right? And Dan Duryea gets out of there. Then he gets hit, no, he gets shot by the police just coincidentally. And it turns out, oh, he was there. And then it just wraps up like that. Like, like just this chance encounter with the police, and he took something like a watch that belonged to the dead man from her apartment on his way out, so they find that on him, and he took some money from her. So they just, oh, he's the guy who murdered him. So it's kind of a cop out the way it wraps up, but I can live with that. Then she phones Professor Richard Wainley, so Edward G. Robinson, and tells him, like, I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to kill him, right? And Edward G. Robinson's just like, well, okay, we failed. He feels like he's already compromised himself so much. He's just a family man guy. He's murdered one person, attempted murder of another. It didn't work, and he's just so despondent that he takes some of the poison still left. He takes it, and he dies, but he doesn't die. It's a dream. The whole thing was a dream. So this is what Fritz Lang was so disgusted with. And I'm telling you, it is a cop out. Like, you think he's died, and it's just this tragic sort of thing. And that was just a dream. So at the club, when his friends were talking at the beginning, he just fell asleep. He never actually went outside and meet anybody. And he just sort of dreamed the whole thing. And then he leaves, he sees a picture in the same window, it's a different woman, and then that woman shows up and she says something to him, and he it becomes sort of comedic, and he's like, oh, no, 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 and he runs away. It's really the tonal shift and the dream. It doesn't ruin the movie by any stretch of imagination, but the IMDb scores are one apart. I think one is 7.6, one is 7.5. I think it should lose more than 1 point for that. Like, really, right? Like, it's very it's very jarring. It's not just the suicide; it's the wrap up. Like, Dan Duryea just gets hit by a car for some reason, gets shot or something, and that's not really even really explained why. And yeah, that's it. So then Scarlet Street, much darker right from the beginning. What I love about Scarlet Street is everybody's awful, right? Edward G. Robinson, so pathetic. Like, you're watching it thinking, you deserve bad stuff happening to you. You're pathetic, right? Joan Bennett from the beginning is nasty. Just nothing redeemable about her. Dan Duryea, he's slapping her around. He's awful, right? He's just slimy but fun to watch. And the family situation is awful. His wife is terrible, and then he married her. He wondered, what, why did he marry her? Well, he was living there as a boarder because her husband had died, and she has all this insurance money from him, but she won't touch it, right? Life insurance money from her husband. And then, like, near the end of the film, or a little bit past half, her dead husband shows up, and he's like, wants to Richie Rob blackmail him. So there's blackmail too. There's a similarity, right? Basically, he's like, I'm going to go back and tell her that I'm alive, and that'll ruin your marriage. And that's exactly what Chris wants. He hates his wife. He wants out so he can marry Joan Bennett. And she's basically telling him, oh, yeah, yeah, I'll marry you. But I can't because you're married, right? So he sets up the situation where he says, that your insurance money's in my house. You should come in and get it. So he goes in to get it. He tells the guy that the wife, I guess it's both their wife now, because she's still married to this guy that she thought was dead, but he just left because he couldn't stand her, really, and just had this opportunity to leave with all this money. And money's run out, so he's back to blackmail. Edward G. Robinson sets it up. So he goes in the bedroom to take the money, but she's actually in there. The door closes, so she sees that her dead husband's still alive, and that's how he sort of gets out of the marriage. Right? Goes back to move in with Kitty because he thinks he's scot free, and he overhears her talking with Dan Duryea that those two are actually in love, and they can't she can't stand Chris, and then it wraps up where he, like, stabs her to death, and the thing gets pinned on Dan Duryea, who gets fried in the electric chair. Now he's a nasty character, but nothing he does is really, because he didn't murder anybody, so he doesn't really deserve to fry in the electric chair, right? He's a con artist, That's okay. And he slaps Joan Bennett around, but neither of those are capital offenses. And she doesn't really deserve to die. I mean, she's just a nasty woman, right? She didn't kill anybody. She didn't really do anything that's death worthy, right? And then the ending. So he murders her, and he Dan Duryea fries, and so he basically testifies. Everything points at Dan Duryea, and even Edward G. Robinson testifies, and basically seals the fate of Dan Duryea, who's innocent of the murder. So then he attempts suicide. So there's another similarity. Instead of poison, he tries to hang himself. Edward G. Robinson. He's feeling guilty, right? This guy on the train tells him, murderers never get away with it because their conscience, it's kind of a dumb speech he gives them, right? How your conscience will always carry this murder, and so they really lean into that. So he hears the dead voices of Joan Bennett's character Kitty and Dan Duryea, right? He hears them all the time. It's driving him crazy. So he tries to kill himself, tries to hang himself, right? But instead of in the last movie he kills himself. You see him drink the poison. He closes his eyes and he wakes up. It's a dream. No, he bungled it in Scarlet Street. So he tries to hang himself and he fails, and then he basically becomes homeless because he loses his job. Remember, he was an embezzler, so he gets caught embezzling, and now he sleeps on park benches, and the cops like kick him out of the park, and they're like, yeah, that guy's always around. He keeps trying to confess his murder. He thought he murdered these people 5 years ago, so now he's wandering around homeless, right? He no one will believe that he murdered these people, so he can't assuage his guilt. For some reason, he won't try and kill himself again. I don't know why. I guess he feels he tried that once and it didn't work. I don't know. That isn't really explained. And then the last scene, he wanders past the art gallery. He hears about one of his paintings. These people talking, just sold for $10,000, but he's homeless. They think that Joan Bennett was the Kitty was the painter. She's dead, right? And they think that now it's of course worth more because she's dead. Dan Duryea has fried for her murder, and Chris Cross is just wandering around as this really horrible tragic figure that you kind of think most likely he's going to try and off himself again. So it's a much better ending, much better ending. They all get their comeuppance. Okay, Chris doesn't die, but his life is utterly ruined. It's almost a fate worse than death. It is a fate worse than death, right? He tried to kill himself and it failed, and now he's like living in this sort of limbo state. So much better film based on the ending. Other than that, Scarlet Street can be annoying to watch a little because particularly Joan Bennett and his wife, but Joan Bennett is a lot more on the screen. She really is so unlikable. And like when she's being stabbed to death, like part of you feels like, yeah, because in that scene, she's just awful, right? So you don't really feel bad for anybody. And it's just this great build up, build these people up for their comeuppance, and then nice payoffs in all of those comeuppance. In fact, for many of them, far worse than they deserve, right? So, in fact, the only one who doesn't get the proper comeuppance is his wife. You kind of wish he'd throw her down the stairs. I hate to say it. I mean, she's back with this husband who she worshipped. Turns out he's a real loser. And, before we meet him, we think he was this great, police officer. And it turns out he's just a loser. All right. So, okay, I guess she's stuck with him, but I don't know. I wanted her to get a little bit worse. Anyway, that is those two movies. I highly recommend both of them. I think the Scarlet Street from 1945 is the better one, but I absolutely would watch both of them. I would watch them back to back if I were you. They're great that way. Join us next time as we do a little bit more discussion on film noir for this Noirember, which is really one of my favorite times of the year because I don't watch film noir any other time but November. That would be I just couldn't do that. No, I love film noir and I watch it all year round. And November is just a great excuse to, watch more film noir. And theaters, they have film noir festivals. I'm going to see the Night of the Hunter tonight in the theater, which is always great. I don't get to do that often. Whenever you can see a classic film in the theater, I highly recommend you get there so that, we're telling people that people want to see this, right? And hopefully we'll get more of that kind of stuff. All right, guys, get busy watching or get busy dying. 1,000 movies before you die. Next time. join us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's a great channel. Let's keep it going. And we're always modest about those things.